So, you work hard your whole life for a specific version of the American dream. The nice house in the suburbs. The good school district for your kid. The 2-car garage. The whole 9 yards. You picture quiet evenings. The smell of freshly cut grass. The sound of your daughter's laughter echoing in a big backyard. You don't picture? Well, you don't picture what I'm about to tell you. This story, or I guess I should call it a part of my life now, took place back in the fall of 2019. My wife, Sarah, our 7-year-old daughter, Lily, and I had just bought our first real house. For years, we'd been crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment in the city where the sirens were our lullaby. This new place, a 2-story colonial in a sleepy Connecticut town, felt like a palace. It was a bit older, built in the 70s, with all the charming quirks that come with it, creaky floorboards, a faint, not unpleasant smell of old wood, and a sprawling, slightly overgrown backyard that backed up to a dense patch of woods. It was perfect. It was our sanctuary. The first few weeks were a blissful chaos of unpacking boxes, arguing over where the sofa should go, and discovering which light switches controlled what. We'd order pizza and eat it on the floor of the living room, our voices echoing in the empty space. Lily was over the moon. She'd finally gotten her own room, painted a bright, sunny yellow, and a backyard big enough for a swing set. I remember sitting on the back porch one evening, a cool September breeze rustling the leaves, watching Sarah push Lily on a swing we'd just installed. The air smelled of damp earth and approaching autumn. A Bon Iver song was playing softly from a portable speaker on the windowsill. In that moment, everything felt secure, safe. It was the kind of deep, foundational safety that you take for granted. The kind you don't even realize you have until it's ripped away from you. The first strange thing was so small, so utterly trivial, that it barely registered. It was the kind of thing that happens in any busy family household. We'd had my famous chili for dinner on a Tuesday night. I'd made a huge pot, enough for leftovers for a couple of days. The next day, I went to grab a bowl for lunch, and the large Tupperware container in the fridge seemed lighter than I remembered. I figured Sarah must have had some for lunch as well. When I mentioned it to her that evening, she gave me a funny look. No, I had a salad. I thought you ate most of it. We shrugged it off. I must have been hungrier than I thought. A simple miscalculation. Nothing to it. A week later, a new carton of orange juice, the expensive organic kind that Sarah insists on, was half empty the morning after she'd bought it. Did you get up for a drink last night? She asked, holding up the carton. No, wasn't me, I replied, buttering toast for Lily. Maybe Lily did? We both looked at our daughter, who was meticulously arranging her cereal bits into a smiley face. She was a creature of habit and never got out of bed by herself at night. Ever. The juice monster must have visited, Lily said with a giggle. We laughed. The juice monster. It was a cute, simple explanation, and for a moment, it was enough. We were a young family in a new house. We were tired, overworked, and our brains were juggling a million new details. Of course, we were misremembering things. Of course, we were misplacing things. It was normal. But the small, dismissible oddities began to stack up, like loose change in a jar. One day, it would be my keys, which I always, without fail, leave in the ceramic bowl by the front door, turning up on the kitchen counter. Another time, it was the TV remote, found nestled between the cushions of a living room armchair we rarely sat in. Each time, there was a plausible explanation. I must have been distracted when I came in. Sarah must have moved it while cleaning. Lily was playing with it. We supplied the logic ourselves, papering over the tiny cracks that were beginning to form in the foundation of our safe. Normal life. The first real, red flag, the one that my subconscious couldn't quite rationalize away, came late one night about a month after we moved in. I was in bed, reading, while Sarah was already asleep beside me. The house was settled into that deep, quiet state that only comes after midnight. All I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and Sarah's soft, rhythmic breathing. Then I heard it, a soft creak from the ceiling above me. Our bedroom was on the second floor, right below the attic. It was an old house. I told myself instantly, houses make noise. They groan, they settle, they shift with the temperature. It was nothing. I went back to my book. but the words swam in front of my eyes. My ears were straining, listening past the silence. Scrape. Drag. It was a faint, dragging sound, like a heavy cardboard box being pulled slowly across the floorboards of the attic. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds. And then, silence again. A silence that now felt heavy. Charged. My heart was thumping in my chest. I thought about the attic hatch, located in the hallway just outside our bedroom door. It was one of those simple, push-up square panels. We hadn't even been up there yet. The home inspector had, of course. He'd said it was dusty, filled with old insulation, but structurally sound. I told myself it was a raccoon, or a squirrel. Something must have found a way in from the outside. That had to be it. It was a logical, comforting thought. The next day, I'd check for holes in the eaves. Problem solved. I eventually fell asleep, but it was a thin, restless sleep, and I dreamt of shadows moving in empty rooms. The next morning, I told Sarah about the noise. Probably a squirrel, she said, already in problem-solving mode. Call an exterminator, Alex. I don't want rodents making a nest up there. I agreed, but for some reason, I put it off. Part of me, a small, cowardly part, didn't want to know what was up there. It was easier to believe it was a squirrel than to confront the possibility that it wasn't. The incidents began to escalate. Slowly, methodically. One evening, Lily came crying to us, holding her favorite stuffed bear, Barnaby. Someone was playing with Barnaby. She sobbed. What do you mean, sweetie? Sarah asked, pulling her into a hug. His bow tie is on backwards, she said, pointing to the little red felt bow tie sewn onto the bear's neck. I never put it on backwards. Never. It was such a specific, childish detail. We comforted her, telling her she probably just forgot. That Barnaby was fine. But later that night, after Lily was asleep, Sarah turned to me. That was weird, right? About the bear? It was, I admitted. But she's a kid. They have wild imaginations. Even as I said it, the words felt hollow. We were building a fortress of denial, and the walls were getting thinner every day. The real turning point, the moment our denial shattered completely, happened on a Saturday afternoon. We'd gone to a local farm for their fall festival, hayrides, pumpkin picking, the works. We were gone for maybe 5 hours. When we returned, the house was just as we'd left it. Or, almost. I walked into the kitchen to put down a bag of fresh apple cider donuts. And I stopped dead. On the floor, in the middle of the kitchen tile, was a single, muddy footprint. It wasn't large, but it was definitively an adult's shoe print. It was still damp, and none of us had muddy shoes. We'd taken them off at the door. As always, I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Sarah came in behind me. What's? She trailed off, her eyes fixed on the print. We looked at each other, and in that shared glance, all the rationalizations, all the excuses, the juice monster, the squirrels, the forgetfulness, evaporated. They were flimsy shields against this one solid, undeniable piece of evidence. Someone had been in our house. That night, for the first time, we locked our bedroom door. We were huddled in our own home like fugitives. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. We spoke in whispers. The attic, Sarah breathed, her voice trembling in the dark. The noises you heard, Alex, what if they're coming from inside the house? How? I whispered back. All the doors were locked. The windows are all closed. The alarm system was on. We'd had a basic system installed when we moved in. Sensors on the doors and first-floor windows. It hadn't been tripped. The implication was suffocating. Either the person had a key, or they had found a way in that bypassed the alarm. Or, and this was the thought that made my blood run cold, they were never gone in the first place. We barely slept. The next day, a Sunday, was agonizing. We tried to act normal for Lily's sake, but the air was thick with a silent, shared terror. We were prisoners in our own home, performing a pantomime of normal life. I did a full sweep of the house. I checked every window lock, every door. I went into the basement, a damp, stone-walled space, looking for any possible point of entry. Nothing. Finally, I stood in the upstairs hallway, staring at the square panel leading to the attic. My heart was pounding like a drum. I had to know. I grabbed a stepladder from the garage, my hands slick with sweat. Sarah stood at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale. "Be careful," she mouthed. I positioned the ladder, took a deep breath, and pushed the panel up. It shifted easily, sending a shower of dust and insulation particles down. I poked my head into the darkness. The air was thick and stale, smelling of ancient dust and fiberglass. I shined my phone's flashlight around. It was exactly as the inspector had described. A vast, low-ceilinged space, crisscrossed with wooden beams and buried in a sea of pink insulation. There were a few old boxes left by the previous owners. A discarded rocking horse, the usual forgotten junk. I swept the light from one end to the other. Nothing. No nests. No signs of animal droppings. No muddy footprints. Just dust and silence. I felt a wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy. Maybe the footprint was a fluke. A mistake. Maybe one of us had stepped in mud without realizing it. But as I was about to pull my head back down, my light caught something, tucked away in a far corner, almost completely hidden behind the furnace ductwork, was a small, flattened down section of insulation. It was a slight depression, an indentation. Really, it looked like a place where someone might lie down. And next to it, glinting in the light, were two small, plastic bottle caps, one from a bottle of water, and one from a bottle of juice. Our brand of juice. My blood turned to ice. I didn't say anything to Sarah. I couldn't. I just came down the ladder, closed the hatch, and told her I saw nothing. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The idea of a stranger living in our attic, crawling around above our heads while we slept, was too monstrous to comprehend. But the evidence was staring me in the face. The disappearing food, the late-night noises, the feeling of being watched. That evening, I didn't suggest we call the police. The thought was terrifying. If there was someone living up there, a cornered person, a desperate person, what would they do if they heard me on the phone with 911? They were in the house with us, with our daughter. We were the vulnerable ones. We were trapped. No, a direct confrontation was too risky. I needed proof. I needed to see what we were dealing with. And before we get to the decision I made next, the one that would change our lives forever and plunge us into a nightmare I still can't fully escape, I'm going to ask you to do one small thing. There's a strange, dark, and mysterious, button that lives just below this screen. If you could find it and just give it a gentle push, you'd really be helping me out. Make sure it knows it's a very welcome guest, unlike the one in my story. Alright, thank you for that. Let's get back to it. The next day, I took the morning off work. I told Sarah I was going to the hardware store to get a better lock for the cellar door. What I actually did was go to an electronics store and buy 3 small, high-definition motion-activated cameras, the kind that sync to your phone. That afternoon, while Sarah took Lily to the park, I set them up. I put one in the kitchen, angled towards the refrigerator. I put another in the living room, with a wide view of the main space. And the last one was the hardest. With my heart in my throat, I got the stepladder out again. I quickly opened the attic hatch, placed the camera on a high beam overlooking the little nest I'd found, and got out of there as fast as I could. I felt like I was planting a landmine. That night was the longest of my life. The 3 of us were huddled in my bedroom, supposedly watching a movie on my laptop. But we weren't watching. The movie was just noise to cover the silence. On my phone, I had the live feeds from the cameras pulled up in 3 small windows. For hours, nothing. The kitchen was still. The living room was empty. The attic was a grainy, black and white landscape of utter stillness. I started to feel foolish, paranoid. I started to believe that I was losing my mind, that I was terrorizing my family over a misplaced bottle cap. Sarah must have felt it too. She put her hand on my arm. Maybe we should just go to sleep. Alex, maybe. She was cut off by me grabbing her arm. My breath hitched in my chest. On the screen, in the window showing the attic feed, something had changed. A section of the far wall, a part one had assumed was solid drywall behind the furnace, was moving. A panel, seamlessly blended into the wall, was swinging inward, and from the inky blackness behind it, a figure emerged. It wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was worse. It was a person. They were thin, almost emaciated, and wearing a strange collection of mismatched clothes. I recognized a gray hoodie that had gone missing from my laundry basket weeks ago. They moved with a slow, practiced silence, like an animal in its own den. They didn't use a flashlight. They didn't need one. This was their space. They knew every inch of it. We watched, paralyzed, as the figure crept from their hidden alcove, stepping carefully on the wooden beams to avoid making a sound. They moved directly to the attic hatch, the one right above our hallway. Just feet from where our daughter slept. They didn't push it up. Instead, they slid their fingers into a tiny crack at the edge and lifted a smaller, almost invisible cutout section, just large enough for them to peer through. We couldn't see their face, just the dark shape of their head. They were listening. They were waiting, confirming that we were settled for the night. My mind reeled. This wasn't a recent intrusion. This was a system, a routine. This person had been living in the hidden, forgotten spaces of our home, in the walls, in the attic, for God knows how long. They moved through our house like a ghost, a parasite, existing in the periphery of our lives. After a few minutes, the head retreated. Then, with the same horrifying silence, the figure lowered themselves down from the hatch, their feet landing on the upstairs carpet without a sound. They were in the hallway with us. My phone screen switched views automatically as the living room camera detected motion. There they were. The figure moved through our home with an eerie familiarity. They went straight to the kitchen. We watched in stunned, silent horror as this stranger opened our refrigerator. They took out the carton of juice, took a long drink directly from it, and put it back. They opened a package of sliced turkey, peeled off a few slices with their bare hands, and ate them while standing in the glow of the fridge light. This was the juice monster. This was the source of all the little oddities, the misplaced items, the creeping sense of unease. It wasn't our imagination. It was him. He wandered into the living room, picked up the TV remote, and turned on the television, keeping the volume so low it was just a murmur. He sat on our couch, in our home, watching our TV. Then he did something that will haunt me until the day I die. He got up, and with the same slow, deliberate pace, he walked back up the stairs. The hallway was empty on the camera feed. For a second I thought he was going back to the attic. But he didn't. He walked past the attic hatch. He walked towards Lily's room. The camera in the living room only caught the bottom of the stairs, so we couldn't see what he was doing. My entire body went rigid. Sarah let out a choked sob, which she smothered in a pillow. Every protective instinct in my body screamed at me to burst out of the room, to tackle this man, to end this. But fear held me in place. The cold, rational part of my brain knew that a sudden confrontation could lead to violence. And Lily was in that room. An eternity passed. 1 minute. 2. Then, the figure reappeared at the top of the stairs and descended back into the living room. He hadn't done anything. He had just watched her sleep. The violation of it, the intimacy of the intrusion, was more terrifying than any threat of violence. He lingered for a little while longer before returning to the attic, pulling himself up through the hatch with a practiced ease, and disappearing back into the hidden panel in the wall. The camera feeds went still again, but our world had been permanently tilted on its axis. We were not alone. We were living in a cage with a predator we couldn't see. A human predator who knew every corner of our lives. The question was no longer, what is happening? The question was, how do we get out of our own house alive? Calling the police was still a terrifying gamble. The man was in the walls. We had no idea where his hidden passages led, how many exits he had. If he heard us making the call, he could panic, he could become violent, he could get to Lily before we could get to her. The risk was too great. So began the most surreal and terrifying 48 hours of my life. We had to devise a plan to escape our own home without alerting the man who was, at all times, just a few feet away from us, separated only by a layer of drywall and insulation. We communicated in frantic whispers and scribbled notes on a notepad, like spies in a war zone. The first note I wrote was, "We leave tomorrow. We don't pack. We just go." Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with terror. The plan was simple, and we hoped, foolproof. The next morning, we would act completely normal. We'd get up, have breakfast, get Lily ready for her day. Then, Around 10 a.m., when the man was likely asleep in his hidden nest after his nocturnal foraging. Sarah would announce loudly, for the benefit of anyone listening, "Okay, Lily Bug, let's go to the big playground by the river. It's such a beautiful day." She would grab her purse and Lily's hand and walk out the front door. She wouldn't run, she would just leave. Once she and Lily were safely in the car and down the street, she would call me. I would pretend to answer a work call. I'd say something like, "Oh, right now? Okay, I'll be right there." I would grab my keys from the bowl, making sure to use the bowl, and walk out. We would meet at a diner 5 miles away and then, and only then, would we call 911. That night, none of us slept. I sat in a chair propped against the bedroom door, holding a heavy mag light, my eyes glued to the camera feeds on my phone. I watched him repeat his routine. Emerge from the wall, creep through the house, eat our food, watch our TV, and stand in the doorway of our daughter's room. Seeing it happen again, knowing he was there, filled me with a mixture of paralyzing fear and white-hot rage. The next morning was pure psychological torture. Making breakfast, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the spatula. Every sound, the toaster popping, the clink of a spoon against a bowl, seemed deafeningly loud. I was terrified the man would hear the frantic beating of my own heart through the floorboards. We had to put on a performance for an audience of one. We smiled, we laughed, we spoke about the beautiful weather. It was the most difficult acting job of my life. At 10:15 a.m., Sarah took a deep, shaky breath. "Okay, Lily Bug," she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "Let's go to that big playground by the river." Lily, oblivious, cheered, "Yay, can I bring Barnaby?" "Of course, sweetie," Sarah said, her eyes meeting mine for a split second. I could see the terror behind her forced smile. I watched from the living room window as she buckled Lily into her car seat. She got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. She didn't look back. Phase 1 was complete. I waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The house was silent, but it was a predatory silence. I felt like I was bait in a trap. Was he listening? Did he know? My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Hello?" I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Oh, hey, boss. Yeah, the server is down? Okay, yeah, I can come in. I'll leave right now." I hung up. I walked to the front door, my legs feeling like lead. I grabbed my keys from the bowl. My hand was inches from the doorknob when I heard it. A floorboard creaked directly above my head, in the ceiling of the foyer. He wasn't in the attic. He was in the crawlspace between the first and second floors. He was right there. He was listening. My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to bolt out the door. But I knew I couldn't. I had to finish the performance. I cleared my throat, feigning annoyance. Always something with work, I muttered to the empty house. I turned the knob, stepped outside into the bright sunlight, and closed the door behind me. I didn't lock it. I didn't want him to hear the click of the deadbolt. I just walked, at a normal pace, to my car. I got in, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was 2 blocks away. The relief that washed over me was so powerful I had to pull over to the side of the road and gasp for air. We were out. We were safe. I met Sarah and Lily at the diner. We hugged each other, sobbing with a mixture of terror and relief. Then we called the police. What followed was a blur. Squad cars descending on our quiet suburban street. Officers with drawn weapons entering our home. They found it just as we had. The cameras were still recording. But the man was gone. They found his nest in the attic, just as I had, and they found the hidden panel. It led to a series of narrow, unfinished crawlspaces that snaked through the entire skeleton of the house. It was a network of secret passages. They found food wrappers, empty water bottles, and a small, pathetic pile of our belongings he had stolen over time, a spare blanket, a few of my old sweaters, one of Sarah's scarves, and Lily's missing doll. They also found the point of entry. In the back of a closet in the guest bedroom, behind a false wall, was a small, cleverly hidden opening that led directly into the main crawlspace network. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had apparently never even known it was there. The police believed he had likely been squatting in the house when it was vacant. Before we bought it, and had simply stayed. But of him, there was no trace. The forensics team found some unidentifiable fingerprints and a few DNA samples from the bottle caps. But they never matched anyone in any database. He had used his secret passages to slip out the back of the house and into the woods behind our property when the police arrived. He was a ghost. He had a name, a face, a story, but we would never know it. He just vanished, disappearing back into the cracks of the world from which he came. We never went back to that house. We couldn't. How could we ever sleep there again? Knowing its secret anatomy? Knowing that its walls were hollow and had once held a silent, watchful tenant? We sold it at a significant loss to a development company, who I think tore it down. We never disclosed the full story. We just said we had a severe, unresolvable vermin problem. I guess, in a way, that was true. It's been almost 6 years. We live in a different state now, in a brand new house with no history and no attic. But the feeling has never left me. That lingering dread, that violation, it's a scar on my psyche. I still check the locks 3-4 times a night. Every unfamiliar creak in the house sends my heart into overdrive. Sometimes, when I'm home alone, I get the distinct, chilling sensation that I'm being watched. I'll see a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision and my blood will run cold. Just for a second, before I realize it's just a shadow. Just the light playing tricks on me. But the worst part, the question that still crawls under my skin and keeps me awake at night, is not what happened to us. It's what happened to him. Where did he go? He was skilled, he was patient, and he's still out there somewhere. And I can't help but wonder if he ever found another family. Another quiet house on a sleepy street. And if he's living there now, silently, in the walls, watching them eat dinner, listening to them sleep, a hungry and uninvited guest in the safety of their home.